Battersea has a lot of railway lines, ranging from the sensible to the experimental to the downright bonkers. Today I'd like to talk about one that never got built, the Battersea Bullet. These days, Battersea Power Station in South London is a high-end shopping mall with many of its heritage features preserved. But for many years, it wasn't at all clear what would happen to it. When it was built in stages from the 1920s into the 1930s, it was deliberately designed to be as attractive as possible. Residents of Battersea were concerned about this massive behemoth that was to be put up by the river, so Giles Gilbert Scott was hired to come up with something that wouldn't offend the eye. You may know Scott as the architect behind the iconic red phone box, and if you didn't, well, you do now. Anyway, the power station he gave them was a truly magnificent beast, an addition to the London skyline to rival the Houses of Parliament or St. Paul's Cathedral. So good was it, in fact, that when the last of the generators stopped turning in 1983, the building was Grade 2 listed. In other words, you couldn't knock it down. But what do you do with a giant disused power station? There were plenty of suggestions, but nothing came of them. The power station stood empty and devoid of purpose, awaiting someone to come along and give it a reason to exist. Well, in 1986 the site was bought by a gentleman named John Broome. Broome was a theme park entrepreneur who owned Alton Towers. Battersea Power Station was to be turned into a unique London-based theme park known as the Battersea. It would have had indoor and outdoor features. Outdoors, there would have been similar rides to ones that existed at Alton Towers. Inside, there would have been an ice skating rink, a balloon ride, and a Victorian-themed street of shops and restaurants. There was going to be a runaway train ride, too, adding to the long list of weird trains in Battersea. Battersea Power Station is not very far from Victoria, one of the main London termini, and one of the busiest stations in the city. The distance between the two is just over a mile. In theory, the Battersea could be reached very easily from London's West End. In practice, Battersea Power Station did not have very good transport connections. The nearest station was Battersea Park, which, to be fair, is not a long walk away. But if you're planning a world-class theme park, you ideally want something as close as possible. There was, and indeed still is, a long abandoned station practically next to the abandoned site. But this had been abandoned so long that there was basically nothing to work with. The plan was to build a new, dedicated station, which I guess would have been more or less on the site of the abandoned Battersea station. Meanwhile, at Victoria there was change afoot. For most of its life, Victoria had been the terminus for the boat trains to the south coast. With the rise of affordable air travel and the construction of the Channel Tunnel, these trains were to be withdrawn. Platform 1, the boat train platform, was therefore shortly to become free. The proposal was for a service known as the Battersea Bullet. Now, when you think about bullet trains, you probably think of something like the Japanese Shinkansen. That's not what Battersea was getting. There was to be a dedicated entrance to Victoria Station on Hudson's Place that would enable passengers to get straight on to the Bullet. The trains would have been a new, specially built class known as the Class 447. These were to be 3 4-car trains dedicated to the route. The design unveiled in 1989 looked quite snazzy, even if the writer John Glover refers to them as basically a Class 319. It was inside where things would be really distinctive. Now, depending which version you go with, the trains would either be windowless, or automatic blinds would come down and cover the windows as it left the station. There would be screens that would play footage to give the illusion that you were travelling incredibly fast. There were also to be touch screens that would enable you to plan your journey. It all sounds rather ambitious for 1989. The trains would, in reality, only travel at about 35 miles per hour, covering the journey in about 3 minutes. At the Battersea, there would be 2 platforms. At one, the bullet trains would terminate. The other would be for trains from elsewhere. It was envisaged that trains could approach the Battersea from the West London line or the Windsor lines via Clapham Junction. Despite being a very flashy service dedicated to a single route, the Bullet was to be operated by British Rail. This was before privatisation kicked in. Apparently the staff would have got fancy uniforms though. The trains would be built by British Rail Engineering Limited, or BREL. During the hours when the theme park wasn't open, it was anticipated that ordinary trains could use Platform 1. It was all very exciting, very confident, and as it turned out, very impractical. The economic downturn of the early 90s recession put the brakes on John Broom's plans. Unfortunately, work had already begun. The roof had been taken off, and the old power station machinery mostly removed. When the Battersea was formally abandoned, the building was left open to the elements, which caused a not insignificant amount of damage over the years. Without the Battersea, the Bullet had no purpose, so of course that project was also abandoned. The power station was again left alone, seeing little use other than as a filming location when they needed somewhere that looked industrial and derelict. It would eventually be returned to use, reopening as a shopping centre in 2022. The solution to the problem of transport was a branch off the Northern Line from Kennington, putting Battersea on the tube map for the first time. So, the tale of the Battersea Bullet is a short one. While undoubtedly it was an exciting idea, I can't help but feel that it's a bit much. I mean, do you really need a super high-tech, state-of-the-art train of the future for a 3-minute journey? I think most people would settle for a train that's just, nice. Windowless trains have been tried before, and people tend not to like them, even if there's nothing to actually see. I suspect that had the Battersea gone ahead, the actual Battersea Bullet would have been a little more basic. But it's all academic, really, because when it comes down to it, the Bullet was a misfire. Well, I do hope you enjoyed today's video. If so, please do leave a like and consider subscribing for more. If you'd like to know more, my 3 main sources were the blogs Ian Visits and Towers Times, and the book London's Branch Railways by John Glover. I would like as ever to thank my donors on Ko-fi, on Patreon, and here on YouTube for your generous support. You are the view screen to my windowless train. And I will see you all again very soon. Cheerio.